Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. H.L. Mencken said, "The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable." He said that over 100 years ago, and things have gotten much worse since.
If you can't admire Joe Biden as a person, then it's probably you got a problem. You need to do some self-evaluation, because what's not to like? And he's the nicest person I think I've ever met in politics.
Is that right?
He is as good a man as God ever created.
Lindsey Graham says Joe Biden is as good a man as God ever created. Let's take a look at Joe Biden's long career in Washington. Joe Biden started serving in the U.S. Senate 50 years ago in 1973, and he's been in the White House for 11 of the last 15 years. When he began his career 50 years ago, the Earth was cooling and scientists were predicting a new ice age. In 1973, the U.S. was dependent on Middle East oil, and when the Arab oil-producing states refused to send any more oil to the United States, we had big problems. Gas became very expensive and people had to wait in line for hours to obtain it. And that's assuming that there was some gas actually available. The history of this goes back 75 years when Arabs declared they were going to drive the Jews in Israel into the sea. Then in 1972, Palestinians tortured, castrated, and murdered the Israeli Olympic team in Munich. The Arab oil-producing states were upset that we didn't support the Palestinians, so on October 17, 1973, they shut down our supply of oil. This caused gas prices in the U.S. to more than quadruple between 1973 and 1974. Americans faced long lines and rationing at gas stations, and oil revenues in Saudi Arabia jumped 40-fold between 1965 and 1975. John Holdren, the man who went on to be Obama and Biden's science advisor in the White House, said the United States was suffering from too much energy too soon. Wednesday, July 23, 1975, by John P. Holdren, the United States is threatened far more by the hazards of too much energy too soon than by the hazards of too little too late. I think the people who had to wait hours to get gasoline might have disagreed with him. Holdren also wrote a paper at that time warning that the burning of fossil fuels was going to cause a new ice age. Holdren was the perfect man for the job to be Obama and Biden's science advisor because nothing he says has anything to do with reality. After the Arab oil embargo, presidents started promising to make America energy independent. This finally happened 5 years ago while President Trump was in the Oval Office. December 7, 2018. Last week, the U.S. exported more oil than we imported for the first time in 70-plus years. And it happened not because of decades of federal energy policies, but despite them. Since Richard Nixon was in the White House, presidents have pushed national energy plans that they said would reduce the country's dependence on foreign oil. These plans all had one thing in common. They all assumed that increased domestic oil production couldn't solve the problem. Instead, from Nixon on down, Republican and Democratic presidents declared that the only way to achieve energy independence was through some combination of strict conservation measures and alternative forms of energy. Donald Trump rejected this nonsense, and he made America energy independent through increased domestic oil production. A few years earlier, Barack Obama said we can't drill our way to lower gas prices.
Now, if there's one thing I know about New Hampshire, it's that your political bull detector is pretty keen. It's pretty sharp. You know that we can't just drill our way to lower gas prices.
And then less than 2 years after Obama left the White House, we drilled our way to lower gas prices and energy independence. Joe Biden didn't like all of this good news, so he promised during the election campaign to shut down American production of fossil fuels.
But kiddo, I want you to just take a look, okay? You don't have to agree, but I want you to look in my eyes. I guarantee you I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate.
Apparently, he wanted to bring us back to the good old days of 1973 when he started his career and Americans had to wait for hours to obtain gasoline. On his first day in office, he shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have been completed by now and pumping 900,000 barrels of oil a day. It would appear that the rest of the world was not impressed by Joe Biden's pledge to shut down fossil fuels because the growth of oil, coal, and gas usage around the world continues to increase. And since Biden took office in 2021, there's been a record increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. North America, Europe, Africa, South America, and Australia could all drop off the map, and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would continue to increase because it's rapidly increasing in Asia. Chinese carbon dioxide emissions now exceed all developed nations combined. 9 years ago, Barack Obama and Joe Biden made an historic climate agreement with China. The agreement was that the United States would reduce our CO2 emissions while China would continue to increase them until the year 2030. And now China has dropped any pretense that they intend to get rid of fossil fuels. They say net zero is impossible. The Obama-Biden-China climate change agreement was their typical empty nonsense. It was all propaganda and no substance. Biden is not only targeting U.S. carbon dioxide emissions, but he's also targeting U.S. methane emissions. He says that methane leaks from pipelines are destroying the climate. And according to Seymour Hersh, Biden also created the largest methane leak in history when he blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. The White House was giddy with excitement after this happened. 15 years ago, Obama and Biden promised to create 5 million new green jobs by confiscating $150 billion from taxpayers. And out of the 5 million jobs they promised, Obama and Biden actually delivered less than 5,000 at a cost of well over $1 million per job. Then 14 years later, Biden repeated the same scam. His Inflation Reduction Act was going to create millions of new green jobs and save the climate. But over the last 12 months, the taxpayer theft from this version of the scam has increased from $385 billion to over $1 trillion. Silicon Valley Bank was at the center of the Inflation Reduction Act, and they collapsed just a few months after the act was passed. 4 days before they collapsed, Forbes announced that they were one of America's best banks. The Biden comedy show goes well beyond the topics we've already discussed.
Trump campaigned on build that wall. Are you willing to tear that wall down?
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed on my administration.
And now, 3 years after shutting down construction of the wall, Biden says he's building it again. Millions of undocumented, unknown, and likely unvaccinated people have been streaming across the border into the United States relatively freely. And at the same time, Biden was banning the world's #1 tennis player from entering the country because he wasn't vaccinated. In Biden's view of the world, one healthy unvaccinated tennis player was a threat, but millions of unknown unvaccinated people aren't. This sort of irrational crazy has typified Joe Biden's career over the last 50 years. 2 weeks ago, Biden said that Hamas is a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews. This came 2 years after Biden gave $150 million to Hamas. If Biden believed that the purpose of Hamas was to kill Jews, why did he give them lots of money? Biden reversed President Trump's policies about energy, immigration, and the Middle East. One could easily come to the conclusion that the United States would be better off if President Trump was still in the White House. 35 years ago, Biden dropped out of the presidential race because he got caught too many times committing plagiarism and lies.
Senator Joseph Biden dropped out of the hunt today, saying the disclosures about his plagiarism in law school and his exaggerations about his academic record made it impossible for him to continue.
I do it with incredible reluctance, and it makes me angry. I'm angry with myself. for having been put myself in the position of having to make this choice.
The Delaware Democrat is the second candidate to be forced from the race by questions of character and integrity.
35 years ago, Democrats pretended to care about character and integrity, but that no longer seems to be the case. As H.L. Mencken pointed out a long time ago, almost inevitably, thinking people come to the conclusion that the government they live under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable. And the problem is on both sides of the aisle. Lindsey Graham says Joe Biden is as good a man as God ever created. Toto wonders, if these politicians were out to destroy America, what would they do differently? Almost everyone in America and the vast majority of people around the world depend on fossil fuels for their day-to-day survival. But Biden promised to shut down our essential supply of energy. Toto thinks this is both intolerable and insane. You can visit Toto and his extended family of puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.